And now I'm excited to introduce you to Lauren Kort, Senior Manager of Talent Intelligence at Indeed. We are talking about women in the workplace. This event is sponsored by Indeed. And Lauren, I'd love to hand it over to you. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career journey and what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Georgine, and good afternoon. I think, unless you're calling in from Hawaii, I think it's good afternoon for everyone. So thank you so much for joining today. As you mentioned, I am a senior manager of talent intelligence at Indeed. What my team does is we take all of the interesting insights and research and job seeker behavior and studies that we're doing, and we seek to glean from that actionable insights that employers can apply to their recruitment challenges. So we might be talking one day about employer branding, and the next day is DEI and B, and the next day is job content optimization or labor market conditions. So it's kind of like being a third-party consultant for our clients, but I just happen to work at Indeed. So it's a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful organization. This is the longest I've ever been with a single company. Just celebrated 6 years this summer, and it's another stop, if you will, on my career that has largely been in the recruitment space in one way or another, be it on the media side of things. I worked in agency relations, but yeah, the majority of my career has been in this talent acquisition space, which I found really fulfilling. Yes, I'm not solving world hunger. I don't work for the Mayo Clinic, but in some small way, the work that we're doing is helping people find jobs that are true to them and help employers find top talent and connect those two things together. And that feels good when you're laying your head down at night and thinking about your day's work and your contribution. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. You have the perfect background to be talking about the variety of topics we have lined up. The first one I want to talk to you about is something really close to my heart, which is evaluating if a company's culture is right for you when you are searching for a job. That's, after all, one of the reasons why we started Fairygodboss, to help women navigate that job search. Lauren, what do you think should be something someone looks for when they're trying to identify if a company culture matches their lifestyle and them?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I am not the expert to tell any one person what they should look for, because the first thing you have to do is identify what matters to you and where your priorities are. Is flexibility top of mind? Are you looking for a company that's mission driven? Is it important to you that you find an environment that really puts a high emphasis on inclusion? What matters to you most? And once you've identified that, then you can start to do the research to figure out whether that environment, that culture, that organization will support what it is that you're passionate about. So, because there are multiple dimensions of a company's culture, and again, not everyone cares about the same things. We know, for example, some of the research we've done when we look at job seekers who are just starting out or job seekers who are closer to the end of their career, they both prioritize this notion of meaningful work. Whereas more of your Gen Xers, kind of in the middle of the career, they're prioritizing the work-life balance, comp and benefits, et cetera. So different things matter to different people, and that might change over the course of your career. So determine what that is. And then again, do your research. You've got Fairygodboss, you've got Indeed, you've got Glassdoor, you have your friends and colleagues, and so many ways that you can ascertain what it's really like to work for an organization. I would caution you, because anyone with a keyboard, of course, these days can have a voice, whether it's about an organization, whether it's about the restaurant down the street. I was on Amazon once buying Scotch tape for wrapping presents, and there were 450 reviews for Scotch tape. And I thought, how much do we need to know about this? Is it sticky? Yes. End of review. That's all I need to know. But the point is, if it can be reviewed, it will be, and your company is no exception. I would encourage you to take kind of an Olympic judging approach to reviews and evaluating companies. So, if you're watching snowboarding or one of those more subjective sports, and they throw out the low score, they throw out the high score, and then you're left with the middle, kind of the same thing. You're going to have those people who say 5 stars, amazing, working here is like heaven. And then you're going to have the 1 star, would never recommend, I would rather be getting a root canal. Well, surely the truth has to lie somewhere in the middle. So throw up the high and the low, take it with a grain of salt, but there is enough information out there to really understand what's going to work for you. And not only listening to what employees have to say, but what does the employer themselves have to say? Are they transparent? Are they authentic? No company is perfect. No company is the equivalent of, Tom Hanks or pizza or things we can all universally enjoy. So, but are they acknowledging and owning maybe those places where they're striving to do better, especially coming out of these last few years that we've all gone through, where job seekers have said, you know what, could I dare to be happy at work? Could I dare to be fulfilled by this thing I'm spending so much time doing? Expectations have changed, priorities have changed, and employers in many cases are changing as well, but they might need some time, or it might be, a learning process. See what they have to say about where their own priorities lie, and do those align with yours. And I would caution you, we don't want to confuse perks with culture. So it can be very easy to be wooed by, ooh, they have a pinball machine in the employee break room, and there are free coffee during the day and so on. That will only get you so far, right? That's a perk. That's not part of that environment of what it feels like to work for that organization. So be mindful of the difference there. Now, if one of those perks was something like at Indeed, we have one Friday off a month where we call it a U day, and everyone has the day off. And what's great about it, even though we have unlimited PTO, is that knowing that everyone has that day off and your inbox is not piling up because none of your colleagues are working, it goes a long way. Now, that's technically a perk, but it does speak to the culture because it tells me they're prioritizing work-life balance, my mental health, giving me a day to breathe, and that sort of thing above and beyond what I can do on my own. But when it comes to something like we have free snacks in the office, I don't want to be so enamored by those sorts of things that I'm missing what those areas like belonging, inclusion, your priorities, and then do your research and start to check on how they stack up to what matters to you.
Some great advice in there. And since you mentioned earlier that you've stayed at Indeed longer than at other employers you've been at, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Indeed's company culture and how that differs from other companies you've worked at or other companies that you're aware of. And what can someone who's interested in working at Indeed expect?
Sure. Well, it will be slightly different for everyone. I'm a remote employee. I sometimes have occasion to go to our New York office or Austin office, which is great. And there are certainly some threads amongst in-person offices in terms of what you can expect and what the environment is like and so on. But really, our culture at Indeed, it starts with our mission. So we're creating products, solutions that are providing opportunities for all job seekers. And that's really the key there, because likewise, we hire Indeedians who mirror the job seekers that we're looking to support and have backgrounds that represent all job seekers. We also are looking to create inclusive environments where we're supporting diversity of thought. We want people to feel comfortable. We want them to feel safe, really being themselves. And so it's that sort of environment where I have a voice. I have a voice at any level of the organization that I would like to speak to and have a conversation with and share my thoughts and opinions and ideas. There are quarterly meetups where I can submit questions to our CEO and get that real-time feedback with the entire organization on board. We have listening sessions for when we do our surveys of our employees to kind of take a pulse of how people are feeling. It doesn't just say, oh, fill out the survey and you're left wondering, are they doing anything with that information? I know they are, because we get that communication back about what action's being taken. The listening session, as I mentioned, where I can speak with someone about following up on my thoughts and my opinions and so on. We really strive for this notion of radical candor and an environment of transparency. We're here to help job seekers, but we're also here to help each other. Management is here to help to create that environment and that culture that we are striving for. I'm sure many of the folks on this call today work for organizations that have IRGs or ERGs, inclusion resource groups, employee resource groups, whatever you call that. At your place of employment, we call them IRGs. And we have them around, women at Indeed. We have parents and caregivers. We have Black Inclusion Group. There are so many different IRGs and communities within Indeed. And what's great about it is, again, it's not just, we meet and we talk and we're perhaps like-minded and have some similarities. There are representatives, iRewards representatives in those groups that then go back and advocate for benefits that are necessary. So my colleague who's with us today, Rick, he was actually the one who came up with the idea for U Days. And that was from his IRG process, where he said, what we could really use? And it was actioned upon, and it was implemented in a pretty quick manner, given that we're a 13,000 person organization. So we really do strive. The things we're talking to employers about are things that we struggle with ourselves. We are imperfect, but we keep trying every day to create those environments and those safe spaces for all of our employees. It may sound cliche, Georgine, but it really is the relationships and the people. That's what keeps you coming back every day. The snacks are nice, but the snacks are going to keep you coming back every day. It is those relationships, my colleagues who I trust, I respect, I admire, I learn from, and hopefully that's a two-way street. That is the type of environment one can expect at Indeed. And especially in this world of being remote, I may or may not be wearing pajama pants right now. You don't know. But in this world that we are in, that is that much more difficult to make people feel like they belong and are included. And so we are out there trying to make that happen every day. And yeah, 6+ years later, it's an organization I feel great about.
That's wonderful. That it sounds like Indeed really embodies so much of what the best practices need to be at work in order to attract talent. I mean, this is what the company does. So that's wonderful to hear. For those of you who might be tuning in a little bit later than missed the introduction, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat so that Lauren and I can address it as we have this conversation. So it's great to hear about Indeed's culture and how to figure out whether a culture, depending on your phase of life and your personal needs are. But is there any advice you have for someone who realizes they're in a job and at a company, but they are finding that the culture isn't a good fit for them? So, maybe they've just joined and they realized what they were sold, or they didn't do enough research, isn't really matching what they need, how, beyond doing research and just like looking within yourself to figure out what your priorities are, what do you do then? And how can you maybe avoid making that mistake again?
Yeah, well, it's a fair point. And I would say I wouldn't beat yourself up and say, I made a mistake, because for starters, we all make the best informed decision we can with the information we have available. And there's only so much you can do with research and colleagues or looking at employees and so on. And also, organizations can change. If you joined a startup as employee number 20, I can guarantee you when you're up to 500 and 1,000 people, it's going to feel very different. Maybe some of that scrappiness and grittiness is no longer as prevalent, and you're thinking, oh gosh, there's a lot of red tape here, and I don't enjoy this as much. Organizations have to evolve and change, and sometimes that may or may not jive with what you're looking for. So if you find yourself in that situation, for starters, you have to be your own biggest advocate. Speak up, voice your concerns, but more importantly than voicing your concerns or not more importantly, but along with voicing your concerns, offer solutions. Mm. I think that's key, is rather than saying, I've noticed these 5 problems, say, I've noticed these 5 opportunities, and here are the 5 solutions that I might recommend we take a look at. But really controlling what is within your sphere of influence. So if you're not the CEO, you're not the CHRO, what is it you can do within your environment to make a change? And a lot of times that starts with, your immediate people manager, speaking up. You don't want to live with this feeling for weeks and weeks and months and let it build. And then, next thing you know, you've just kind of reached your breaking point. So speaking up early and often, and opening up those lines of communication of what it is that's not sitting right with you. And then you can figure out, is this something that could change? Is this something that I can do something about? Or is it time for me to look for another opportunity? Because, as I mentioned, being at a company 6 years, for better or for worse these days, it is kind of unusual. And I think most of us on this call know that we live in a world where you're not staying with an organization for 30 years most of the time. So if you need to make that change, do that for you and be your own biggest advocate. In terms of how to avoid it in the first place, if possible, again, it comes back to research, but really paying attention during your entire application, interview process, and so on. Because, when you're looking at that and saying, oh, this culture isn't jiving with me, is it the company or is it your department? Like, is what you're experiencing a microcosm of the company as a whole, or is it a subculture? And perhaps that environment itself isn't working for you, but there are other places in the organization that could be a better fit. But when you pay attention during that interview process, if you're interviewing in person, how were you greeted? How are you taken care of while you're waiting, for the interviewer? What are you seeing and observing in terms of how people are interacting with one another as you're making your way to the interview room? It's kind of like it's kind of like dating in a way. You go to a restaurant with someone and you pay attention to how they interact with other people you run into along the way, because it really tells you something above and beyond them maybe trying to woo you in that process, the way an employer might try to woo you. So have your antenna up, pay attention, do your research, and you will make the best decision you can. And if at some point that decision is no longer right for you, you can make a new one. That's one of the wonderful things about this world we live in, as it relates to career. You are in control of that destiny. So control what you can, and advocate for yourself.
I love that you started with trying to speak up about your concerns, even if you're not in a position with a C title or in an HR role, because you may not be the only one who feels the way you do about a culture that doesn't fit. And then, there's some power in numbers, and IRGs or ERGs are another way to sort of bring up issues in a sort of a safer, inclusive environment. So that's great. And actually, Trish was asking this question about whether to stay or find a better culture fit. And I think you addressed the whole range of options and things to think about. So that was.
There's a balance, Georgie, and I think we can all agree. We've all had bad days. We've all had bad weeks. Heck, maybe we've had a bad month. And you have to determine for you, where is it I'm having a bad day, a bad week, and this is a finite period of time, and where is it, this is a systemic problem, this is a perpetual issue. I've kind of pushed and pulled the levers that I have within my control, and it's not going to correct itself. Changing jobs, just like moving or getting married or having a child leave the house, is one of the most stressful life experiences you can have. And so it's not something to be taken lightly in terms of, making that decision. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, gosh, we're spending 40, 60, 80 plus hours a week of our lives, depending on our role. You deserve to have happiness and well-being within that space. And especially in today's job market, as a job seeker, you have the power to control that, and you have options. So take advantage of that when necessary. But yeah, I would caution to take a measured approach. I'm not opposed to a good old pros and cons list,
Right.
Write it out on paper, look at it objectively. Let me use some friends and family as a sounding board. Am I too wrapped up in the day-to-day? Am I, feeling a little too emotional about this? And I need to step back. All of those things can help you to make that right decision.
100%. And let's say somebody does decide it's time to look for a new job, going to get out there again, apply, go through the interview process. You talked about having your attendance up in the interview process, but what would you say is the best approach to an interview process these days? I mean, jobs are very different. There's entry-level positions, there's executive positions. Are there any themes or thematic advice you can give regardless of what job seeker level or type of role you're looking for?
There's certainly, in terms of, what is the same across the board, regardless of whether, to your point, this is an entry level role or you're interviewing to be the CEO. Remember that you are very much interviewing them as well. I think historically, maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. We don't have time to get into it. But I know for me, growing up and into my early career, in terms of the balance of power, if you will, it very much, I felt like, ooh, I hope I get this, and ooh, I hope they pick me, and ooh, they have the power, they're in control. I'm just sitting here waiting for them to say yes or no. And somewhere along the way, I fortunately realized that no. This is my career.
Right.
This is my future. And I am interviewing them and deciding on them just as much as they are deciding on me, because it's a two-way relationship, right? And so having that mindset, not only does it help take, I think, a little bit of the pressure off. Again, I go back to the analogy of dating. I had one of my friends the other day said, "Oh, I hope he likes me. I hope he likes me." I said, "I hope you like him." It's not just this one-sided thing. And so similarly, remember that you're interviewing them as well. Now, to that end, have some questions, show interest, and think about those things down the road. As we mentioned, ask them about the culture, ask them about what they enjoy coming to work, what they enjoy about coming to work every day, what's something they would change if they could. All of those sorts of things are going to give you that insight that you need and help you make the right decision for you. I would also think about going back to this notion of lists. What are your non-negotiables versus your nice to haves? So if you have a certain salary that you're looking to make, and you're worlds apart on that salary, let's not waste each other's time. That's okay. This isn't the right role for you. And we can move on to other opportunities. Maybe you go in thinking, oh, I definitely want to be remote. Is it a must have or is it a nice to have? Could you do 3 days in office, 2 days at home? Would that be okay? What does flexibility really mean to you? Does it have to be remote, or could it be, well, you have autonomy over your start and end times. You can come and go as you please. Is that enough? So really have that conversation with yourself over what are your deal breakers and then what are just kind of the nice to haves. We talked about this before, researching, preparing, being authentic. We get a little nervous, we get dressed up, we're on our best behavior, all that good stuff. But bringing yourself and who you are. There's a lot of talk in the industry like, ooh, we want people to bring their whole selves to work. Not everyone wants to bring their whole selves to work, and that's okay. But whatever you do bring, you want to make sure that that's authentic and that is true to who you are, because that's what they're going to be seeing kind of down the road. Be self-aware. If you know that you don't do great in interview situations or you get a little bit stressed or what have you, practice. Stand in front of the mirror, kind of do the Wonder Woman pose, and kind of stand in your power and feel that confidence. Practice in the mirror, interview yourself if that's something that works for you. I know for me, I can't be over prepared, or else I get tripped up because, ooh, I forgot to mention that one word, and then I'm just off the rails. So that's me. But be aware of what works for you. I would also encourage you, try to anticipate some of those questions about your skills as they relate to the job description. So if they're looking for someone with 5 years of SQL, be ready for a succinct answer about your experience with SQL, how you've applied it, etc. This was a trick they taught us, not a trick so much as a recommendation they taught us coming out of business school 20 something years ago. And it was the STAR method. And I still use it today. So the STAR method is the S is for situation, T is for the task, A is for action, and R is for result. So thinking of the things that you want to convey to that interviewer, what was the situation? We were launching a new website in Japan. What was your task? I was responsible for XYZ. What action did you take? And what was the result? It helps keep it succinct. It helps get you to the point of what they're looking for in terms of your qualifications and skills. And it makes sure you're presenting yourself in the best light, and not forgetting some of those key points. So that is something you can use at all stages of your interview, your career journey.
Yeah, big fan of STAR myself.
Yeah, it works.
It just gives structure to open-ended questions that you want to provide as an interviewer.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit. You know that Fairygodboss is a career community focused on women, and a lot of people here today are women. And I think we really care at Fairygodboss about gender equality and parity and all the issues that women in particular face in the workforce. What do you, as somebody who's really plugged into talent insights, labor market dynamics, what do you think we need to know about what's going on with women in the workforce right now?
Yeah, and we've come a long way. Unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. In the US, we're almost at gender parity for entry-level roles. We're almost at that 50-50. Where we still see a disconnect is this broken rung phenomenon where women are not promoted into management roles as often as men are. And then that has this trickle down effect. So the further you go up the ladder, the fewer women there are to promote, and it just kind of builds upon itself. So when you look at entry level roles, like 2016 compared to 2021, which is the most recent data I've seen, again, we're like 2 percentage points shy of that parity. And then at management, it drops down. For every 100 men who are promoted to a management role, only 86 women are. So there's work to be done on both sides of the coin. We certainly talk to employers a lot about what they can do to help increase gender parity, but from a job seeker perspective as well, or more importantly, from an employee perspective, going back to that notion of advocating for yourself, of throwing your hat in the ring, rather than waiting to be tapped on the shoulder, of making your intentions known. Hey, I'm 6 months in. Thanks so much for this opportunity. Here's where I want to be in 6 months. Here's where I want to be in a year. Here's the plan I have in place. What else do I need to do? How can we make that happen? And really advocating for yourself. We also know, as it relates to women in the workforce, the pandemic is the elephant in the room here because it had such a disproportionate effect on women, not only because of some of the industries that were affected more, that women tend to hold higher percentages of, if you will, but also because of caregiving roles. So when we looked at women who had to leave the workforce during the pandemic, they were 67% more likely to be primary caregivers. And it still is affecting us. When we look at what they call the prime age group, so it's 25 to 54, which I find increasingly offensive with each passing year. But for better or for worse, that is the prime age group, as economists and so on, they call it. We have more men in that age group in the workforce in the US than we did before the pandemic began. We're still about 500,000 women short. So some of those things, again, employers need to work on. Some of those things we can advocate for ourselves, and be aware of in terms of, what are the maybe some of the biases we face, what are the challenges we face, and how can we advocate for ourselves to overcome that. But yeah, I would say in a nutshell, there's still a long way to go. For my part, in my role at Indeed, I am fighting the good fight, as they say, in terms of helping to educate and consult with employers on how they can help to close that gap. Even compared to the other developed economies, we're about 11 percentage points shy between women and men in the labor force participating in the US. In the UK, it's only 6%. In Sweden, it's 4%. So there's a lot more that we can be doing, and a lot further that we have to go.
There's individual action, there's employer action, there's government policies that really make a difference in terms of childcare or caregiving in general too, that the
Absolutely.
UK and the Nordic countries do differently than the United States.
Yeah.
But employers, certainly in the US context, do many things. And I'm sure you have seen employers have different policies, benefits. Are there any programs or initiatives that you've come across that you think really can make a difference in terms of either attracting or retaining women?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it's not just one stage. So when we're working with employers, we're talking about all stages of that candidate journey. What can we do when women are considering our organization? What about when they're applying, when they're interviewing, and then beyond, when they've come on board and they've been hired? So in terms of consideration, this kind of takes us back to the beginning of our conversation around culture. What elements tend to be more important perhaps to women than men? Now, of course, there are a lot of similarities across genders, but to your point about caregiving, since it tends to fall more squarely on the shoulders of women, what sort of environments do we have in place to support mothers and other caregivers in our organizations. What are we doing around flexibility and work-life balance and so on? But in applications, even, Georgine, there's really fascinating research about if you're looking at a job description and there are 20 bullet points for the requirements of the job, men and women have very different thresholds for how many of those boxes or bullet points they need to check off before they feel qualified to apply. So if there's 20 bullet points, women will need to check 18 or more, men it's more like 12. So employers, in their efforts to be exhaustive, sometimes inadvertently deter women from applying, or even the types of language. Are there gendered language? Is there gendered language in the job description that we can do something about? So we consult on that level. In the interview process, we've looked at companies like Intel and Cisco and seen tremendous gains being made in the number of women being hired, full stop, specifically with African-American women, Hispanic women, when they just institute diverse interview panels, making sure to have 2 or more underrepresented minorities or women in the interview panel itself increases the likelihood dramatically that women will make it through. Things like hiding names from resumes for that unintentional bias that occurs. Think of, has anyone watched The Voice? I think they're in their like 412th season at this point. It's that same notion of, if you don't know, will it influence your opinion of that person's talent, right? I could pull out study after study that talks about how researchers send out the same resume, exact same qualifications. One has a more traditionally male name, more traditionally female name. Females have to work 30% harder to get asked to come in and interview. There's just unintentional bias. There's so many things working against. But I think the biggest thing that we can look for as job seekers to see if employers are doing this is, to your point, once you're hired, how are we supporting? So the IRG, I mentioned at Indeed, we have women at Indeed, we have parents and caregivers, which of course they're both open to all genders, but we tend to have more women in both of those groups. We offer benefits like backup care. I have a colleague who, she might get an email in the morning, a pipe burst at daycare, best of luck to you today. Well, she has a resource and a network where I think it's something like $15 for the day. She can get backup care up to X number of days per year. Our remote and flexible environments, unlimited PTO. We have voluntary work programs. If something happens in your life and you need to take a certain amount of time to deal with that, we have various programs that can help support, have your job to come back to, et cetera. Milk stork. So if you're traveling for work and you need to send milk back home, we have parental leave for all genders. There is a lot that can be done to help move the needle, again, at all stages. And we're out there advocating for that. I think most employers want to dare I say, do the right thing. They want to create environments that are supportive of women, where women feel they are included and can belong. Sometimes they just don't know where to start. And so hopefully some of those ideas can get the ball rolling.
That was a really great list of all the different things that can support employees. But I think it doesn't always have to be these formal programs either, because not all companies are large and have infrastructure and the financial wherewithal to do that. And so colleagues, your managers, coworkers, even your direct reports can be supportive of you when, as an employee, you might have stressors in life, caregiving, childcare. What have you, what do you think that colleagues can do to sort of play that role in helping you stay and to help you, quite frankly, get through the hard times when you have something personal come up?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I would call out is just leading with empathy. we will all have those times. It might not be today. It might not be next month, next year. You will have something. It is life. It is inevitable. Whether it's, bereavement, whether it's, to your point, childcare, someone enters, your family, there will be something, and leading with empathy and understanding can really go a long way, helping to lighten the load to the extent that you can. This happened on my team recently, with a colleague who a family member kind of took ill unexpectedly, took up more of their time than they anticipated. And it was a all hands on deck. And we do, it may sound a little cheesy, but we do consider ourselves a family within, the larger Indeed organization. And that's how we acted. You help out, you pitch in, and that's what we did. So I think from a colleague standpoint is leading with that empathy, knowing this too shall pass. If your manager is saying, hey, we could use this help because so-and-so is going through something, it's not forever. And again, chances are you will need that help in the future. So if we can come at it from that perspective, that certainly goes a long way. As I mentioned earlier, some people like to have clear boundaries between their personal life and their professional life, but we can't deny or escape the fact that they are inextricably linked. You just spend way too much time at work, to not, as much as you may try to leave it at the door. We're human. It's not possible. And so understanding that you are human working with a bunch of humans, and that comes with, some human emotions and reactions and needs, it just can really go a long way.
Absolutely. As we approach sort of the end of our time together, wow, time is flying. I wanted to share a tradition that we have at Fairygodboss, which actually comes out of the fact that we know there's research that shows that women are not as comfortable with self-advocacy. You could call it bragging, tooting your own horn there's a book called Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It, within like boundaries, I guess. But ultimately it's about just owning the things that you've done and accomplished and you're proud of. So would you be willing to role model this act for us and share something, an accomplishment that you're proud of? It could be personal or professional.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think of it as bragging, to your point. As I mentioned at the beginning, you have to be your own biggest advocate. I like to say I am president, secretary, treasurer, social chair of my fan club. My mom is an honorable member because, she's a fantastic cheerleader. But ultimately it has to be you. No one is coming to save you. No one is coming to take control of your career or to your point, toot the horn. So I think that does have to come from us. In terms of, one accomplishment, I rather than like a specific incident or thing, I think, Georgine, something that I'm proud of, in terms of my professional and personal career, because again, this inevitable overlapping, I've been very nomadic in my adulthood. It's New York, San Francisco, Chicago, London. I've been a lot of places, and I've initiated those changes, and I've always kind of had what the hell sort of attitude, because what's the worst that can happen? You don't like it. Okay, you move back. You do something else. Nothing has to be forever. And so doing those big moves and taking those leaps of faith over and over, has built a certain amount of resiliency, and adaptability that has served me very well in other areas of my life. So I'm really kind of I'm kind of proud of that I had the courage to go ahead and do that. I was telling someone this story the other day. I was 24-ish, and this was before Indeed existed. So I was using salary.com, and according to salary.com, I wasn't being paid enough, Georgine. I was working for this small company, and I was doing far more than I had been hired to do. So I built a little binder for myself of accolades and client compliments and so on and so forth. And I scheduled time with my manager. And do you know what I did? I asked for a 50% raise. Now, I am so glad that I didn't consult with anyone, because they would have all told me what they told me afterwards, which was, I'm sorry, you asked for what? You don't do that. You don't ask for that much money. You can't do that. I'm like, well, I did. And no, I did not get, I got 30%, not 50%. But that chutzpah and that boldness and that mixed with a little bit of innocence / ignorance, really served me well in that moment. And somewhere along the way, to your point, your light becomes smaller, and you become conditioned to not speak up and advocate. So I've become wiser over the years, but I try to remember that 24-year-old who just said, I don't know, it makes sense to me. This website says I should make this much, and
Right.
I'm just going to go in and advocate. So I try to remember that person. And as I move and try these new experiences, remember that, I have the tenacity and the I guess I'll say the brazenness of that person.
Just do it.
Still somewhere inside of me. And so I try to apply that. But honestly, in recent years, Georgine, it's when I'm doing speaking engagements at conferences or client events or what have you, and you get the couple people who come up afterwards, and on the employer side of things, it's, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or a job seeker will say, hey, I found my job at Indeed, and I applied one of the things you recommended in the interview, and guess what? I got the job, and I'm so excited. And it's one person, but gosh, it feels like the world, and that makes me feel fantastic, that I can help in that way and contribute in that way. And so, as I mentioned, it may not be, brokering world peace, but it's doing something positive, for one person at a time. And I'm proud of that.
Speaking of which, there is an audience question about going into management for the first time.
Yeah.
That's a very specific step in, the broken rung and everything on the ladder. So is there anything you wish you knew early in your career that you could, share some wisdom about when it comes to your first management role?
Oh my gosh. My first management role was, I remember this very vividly, because we didn't have a name for it then, but I definitely had some of that imposter syndrome. And part of it, quite frankly, was I boiled it down to age, and there was one person in particular who I felt like, well, I'm not old enough to be able to manage this person. What could I offer this person? And I was lacking a little bit of that confidence in my own abilities, my own insights, and it was so foolish, in my youth, to equate age with wisdom in that way, or age with experience, or so on. Of course, that exists to a certain extent. But yeah, I wish I had I hadn't gotten so hung up on some of those dimensions, and had a little more confidence in my abilities, and understanding that management it's so much more than management. It's coaching, it's mentoring, it's being a listening ear and a sounding board. And it's not just what you see in television shows.
Right.
Think that you think a manager does, and that I had a little more confidence in those abilities. But here's the thing, not everyone wants to do it, and that's okay. I went that route, and then I went back into the world of being an individual contributor, because I got a lot of fulfillment from that. And then I found myself being called back into management again, because I was missing some of that opportunity to help others in their career, and to help shape and guide, the policies of our team, and the strategy, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to go that route. You can have a wildly successful career without doing that. But I would say, if you're thinking of it, have that conversation with your current manager to say, what are the opportunities? What are you looking for in promoting someone to that level? Let's come up with a plan to get me there. Because again, it's very rare that someone just taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, would you like to be promoted to manager? You have to show that initiative, show the interest, and show the skill set that is going to be necessary. So I would speak up, create a plan, make your intentions known, and be aware of the opportunities for you within your organization. Some places, like I said, you do hit a certain point where management is the next step. You have to manage people to progress your career at that organization. So figure out what world you're living in, and what that right step is for you.
I love that you said it's not for everyone, because I think it doesn't get discussed enough. And in the engineering culture, it actually is discussed a lot, but outside of engineering, I haven't heard it as much. But as a leader or manager, you talked about leaving, going back to being an IC. What were some of the greatest joys you had or challenges you had as a leader and manager?
I think for one of the things I struggle with the most, candidly, is trying to adapt to people who are, as I kind of mentioned, wanting different things from their career. So really having to take off my Lauren hat, and what does a career mean to me, and what does it look like to me, and how do I approach challenges, and how do I approach, and realizing that people are coming at their job, their role, their what their career means to them from very different places. Not everyone is looking to be CEO someday, and that's totally fine. Meeting people where they are and getting an understanding of where they want to be, so that I can kind of tailor my support and help to them. That is where kind of the art bakes in with the science of management. So, when I first start working with someone, the first thing I ask them are things like, how do you like to be managed? What sort of communication cadence works for you? Because I'm not here to impart my will or my preconceived notions, and make everyone fit into my box of management. To me, I'm here to adapt and support them in the way that's going to help them best succeed and thrive. And that's not everyone's able to even articulate their answer, though. I don't know how I like to be managed. No one's ever asked me that. So you have to learn that together. And so within a given day, you're with employee 1 and it's cheerleader, and then employee 2, it's hands off, and employee 3, you have to adapt and move and change. There are, of course, some themes. I am who I am. I'm never going to be able to completely dial back the cheerleader part of me. I like to praise and celebrate, and that is, but I have to dial that back for people who that makes them uncomfortable, and I'm happy to do it. So I think that's the biggest challenge is this constant shifting and changing in order to best support everyone who's looking to you for that leadership.
And the more inclusive an environment you work in, the more personality types and backgrounds you have to sort of adapt to as a manager.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. It is it's a tapestry of humanity that comes your way as a manager, which is also a privilege. Okay, we have a lightning round couple of questions. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, okay. I know this. Something I wish I had known much sooner was that being yourself, being true to yourself, being authentic, and being successful, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I thought for a really long time that they did. Was, oh, I have to curb certain parts of myself. I have to play the role of the, of the worker bee in order to be taken seriously. And I have realized, especially in the last decade, that I can be goofy. I can, crack my jokes, and I can be sociable and personable, and tell all my anecdotes, and I can still be awesome at my job and very successful. I don't have to choose one or the other, because I can do the goofiness because I have the goods to back it up, so to speak. And there's a lot of things like that, Georgine. I remember speaking to an employer in Omaha once. There are only like 70 people in the room, and their CHRO came up to me afterwards, and she said, I didn't know that I could learn and be entertained at the same time. And I said, well, I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. So there's a lot of those sorts of things where you don't have to pick one. And so, yeah, you can be true to yourself and find a career and be successful at the same time. And that is an amazing feeling that I wish I had known sooner.
Yeah, and a huge relief, right?
Yes.
That we don't all have to conform to some idea. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I completely agree with Catherine, who says incredible insights. I've learned a lot about you, and you've given me a lot of food for thought during this conversation. Thank you to everyone in the audience who's tuned in for our conversation. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out a recording of today's event. So if you missed any part of it or joined late, you will have access to the full recording, as well as resources to learn about wonderful opportunities at Indeed. Get to become one of Lauren's colleagues potentially. In the meantime, be sure to check out Indeed's profile and jobs on Fairygodboss. We'd love to hear your feedback to help us improve on future conversations and events. I believe that we have dropped a link to a survey type form in the chat so that you can give us your thoughts in a 1-minute survey. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lauren, again for this conversation. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.